you will take this opportunity to hear and listen from the global experts that we have gathered. My name is Tim Rawlins. I'm a Director and Senior Advisor from NCC Group. And this is our briefing on Mythos. What's the real story? And for those of you with a classical education, you will note the deliberate play on words of Mythos. So what have we got? Well, we've got me. I'm going to be the host. I'm going to be trying to drive the webinar. And I have brought together three of world-class leading practitioners in this space around AI, so that you get to hear from them. It gives you the ammunition to be able to defend yourself when your boards, your exec teams start throwing questions at you. Questions that you might be uncomfortable answering now, but by the end of this session, I hope you'll have got that ammunition that will enable you to withstand anything that they throw at you. And by way of introduction, let me introduce Andy Davis. So Andy, who you can see there, is our research director. He's the global research director, so he oversees the deep technical research that NCC Group puts together. We are very much a technology-supported organization. So to be in that position, we need to do our own research. So we fund an awful lot of research. Andy will be talking about it a little later on. We also do a great deal of research on behalf of our clients who come to us knowing that we have this depth and breadth of expertise. Then I have David Brockler. David is one of our American cousins who has been leading on some of our AI work and has been really driving forward some of the concepts and ideas for us as an organization, setting the way that we bring the rest of our internal team up to speed and focused on the delivery, the really key delivery for clients around AI. We've got a long history of doing this at NCC Group, and I assure you, he is an absolute technical guru, and you'll have great fun throwing questions at him. And last but not least, a fellow senior advisor from the US, Joel Scrambry. Now, Joel has another deep technical background. He's come out of our penetration testing and our red teaming environment, and is really going to be able to answer some of those practical examples where we have delivered for clients the deep technical work that enables the hyperscalers, enables the frontier models to be used in a safe and secure way. So he'll be talking about that now. So we're going to talk through a little bit about us, just so that you have a better understanding if you're new to NCC Group, a little bit about Mythos, what it is, how we can help secure AI across the board, and then some of the actions. What are you going to be able to do to reassure your board that you've got a grip of it, that you have enough of an understanding, and you know where to get the technical expertise and depth of knowledge, experience, and credibility to support you as you deliver a safe environment for your own organization. So a little bit about NCC Group. We call ourselves a people-powered, tech-enabled organization, and we really are. We rely heavily on a wide range of technology in order to be able to support the key delivery that our consultants are doing round the clock across the globe. We really are an unusual organization in that we are a cyber specialist. We're not a consultancy who does cyber on the side. We're not an insurance company that has reached into cyber to help its clients. We deliver full cycle cyber services. So we've got David's going to pick this up and talk about what it is and what it's not. So David.
Thank you, Tim. So Mythos has been, as everybody knows, a storm of activity over the past week. And so we took the opportunity to dig into the public-facing documentation that they released. We've been doing surveys of AI's penetration testing capabilities, as is known to the market, for quite a while now. And so Mythos, as a platform, didn't necessarily come as a surprise to our AI testing team. So models for many years now, as we're all aware, have continued to improve. But what Mythos has demonstrated, and as Joel alluded to in the previous slide, as he was going over some of those key themes, is that pure model intelligence or strength or ability, or whatever you want to call it, is not in isolation sufficient for that model to be used for cybersecurity tasks. And one of the key pieces of information that Anthropic dropped within their public-facing information dumps is related to the test harnesses that they configure around Mythos. And that, you know, it's kind of like putting an engine of a sports car into the body of an SUV, right? If your test harnesses are insufficient, then your results are going to be insufficient as well, irrespective of how good the model itself is. Now, on the flip side, if you have, the best car body in the world, but you include an engine that's not very good, it's also not going to go very fast. And so finding that intersection between the capabilities of both the model and the test harnesses that leverage that model's capabilities really are paramount when it comes to extracting the max amount of security utility when deploying these types of models in production environments or engagements for security purposes. And so Mythos, we think, is one of the first systems that has publicly struck the right side of that equation. Now, that's not to say that Mythos is the only system that threat actors don't have. Well, to clarify, right? We don't think that threat actors have access to Mythos specifically, but having test harnesses that can properly leverage models that might be available to threat actors are very likely already out there. And so we like to use the phrase, this is an evolution, or this is an evolution, not a revolution, over the steps that the industry is already taking. And so I would expect to see, as we've noted here, a race to catch up with Mythos's capabilities in the near future. In sports, we often see that once somebody sets a record previously thought impossible, it's not long before copycats begin to march in and match those same capabilities. And I expect that over the next year, we're likely to see open frameworks and open models match Mythos's capabilities as it stands today. So from a defender perspective, we do need to be ready for threat actors to be leveraging AI-powered test harnesses to attack production applications. But more importantly, in our opinion, is what we call bionic testing, the augmentation of human capabilities with AI capabilities. We see that AI is capable of getting an absolute breadth of coverage of a particular target. You're not going to see an AI get tired or fatigued of going through file after file. You're dealing with a single instance at a single moment in time. Humans, on the other hand, can build intuition based off of their experience working with applications, working with systems, and especially in non-published data sources, right? Take our red teams, for instance. They build intuitions and playbooks that are never necessarily truly documented out in the wild and don't end up in training data because some of the knowledge that they gain isn't necessarily easily transcribable into words. And so that's not necessarily reflective of these models' capabilities. So the level of depth that a human can achieve when they put their resources into the pipeline and the level of breadth that an AI can achieve when we put its resources into the pipeline is probably going to be part of the secret sauce that we end up seeing threat actors use in the wild. And it's already part of the secret sauce that we're using here at NCC Group in our own testing processes. And I just want to reiterate that with Mythos, this is something that is a continuation on a journey that we're already experiencing. This isn't a completely new ballgame, but if we don't properly respond and take some of the security lessons that have already been apparent to organizations over the past several years, especially when it comes to implementing security controls around their products, they could very easily be left in the dust as the AI security space continues to accelerate the discovery of findings. One of the most common comments that we end up getting is that as AI systems become more advanced, defenders cannot keep up with patching their systems to the latest discoveries. So as a result, we need to be looking at re-implementing not only our bug discovery process, but also our bug patching process to keep up with the continued acceleration of finding discovery within our environments. All right, next slide, please.
So from our point of view, one of the areas that we've seen the concerns from the boards that we've already been speaking to this week is that they're concerned about you and what you are doing for the client, for your own companies. They are concerned about what it's doing for the environment, where and how you are going to be able to manage the situation. So I'm not going to dwell on this. I know we're getting a lot of questions around the technicalities of it, and I want to spend more time with the questions focused on what we are seeing and where we believe Mythos and having its impact on that. But please be aware, your senior management teams are fascinated, interested, shocked, surprised. Well, there's a range of attitudes to this. So we're going to move on to that very closely to enable David more time to spend on this. But the time between discovery and fixing is going to be one of those big challenges. And it comes down to the level of prioritization that you are going to be able to give when the capabilities that are represented by Mythos become more and more popular. To David's point, once a record's been broken, everybody now knows it's achievable, and we can expect to see other organizations doing exactly the same thing. So, David, if we go back to you to talk about how Mythos is presenting the problems and challenges to organizations.
Right. Well, as we see from both boards of directors and executive suites, there is a top-down push for organizations to implement AI into everything they do. That covers everything from hunting for bugs, remediating findings, and maintaining infrastructure. But unfortunately, a lot of organizations are rushing very quickly to implement AI without necessarily thinking about both the governance and security challenges. We see many organizations fall short when it comes to the governance side of things, especially in the form of shadow AI. And we're starting to see certain strides when it comes to implementing centralized AI gateways, systems that can track and manage and provide visibility for how AI is being used. But at the same time, we see many organizations that have widespread scattered AI implementations internally for whatever purposes, or they're leveraging third-party models and potentially exposing their internal sources of information. We also see them running into agentic identity problems. This is something that we experienced and conversed with a lot of customers about at RSA, being when an agent is the entity conducting an action, how do you properly ascribe it to an identity within an organization? Is it the individual who invoked that agent? And then what happens if you have multiple agents chained together, or multiple sources of data feeding into that agent and influencing its behavior? It becomes a difficult problem to solve that the industry is still catching up with. And I anticipate that we'll see continued challenges, especially around compliance when it comes to managing agentic identity. MCP has introduced a very interesting attack surface. Some developers have unfortunately forgotten security first principles when it comes to their hygiene behind their MCP services. We should really be considering those very similar to APIs. And then finally, operator fatigue. We hear all the time that we've included human in the loop to protect our AI operation loops. And ultimately, if we are not properly reserving human in the loop controls for where they're most useful, being that it is an irreversible, a dangerous action that really needs human oversight. If we over-rely on human in the loop, we end up training our operators to begin approving agentic actions that they may not actually want to approve. Now, when it comes to AI applications specifically, we've really seen a new glut of vulnerabilities that extend beyond just, I prompt injected your AI to talk like a pirate. At NCC, we don't even report that as a finding in most engagements. Instead, we really see vulnerabilities that end up exposing confidential internal data due to AI systems that are connected to privileged data sources. We see privilege escalation through excessive agency vulnerabilities. And we really see a lot of indirect prompt injection, usually in the cross-user prompt injection categories. So threat actors who are able to manipulate data sources that AI systems consume are able to make that AI an agent of the threat actor and control its behavior. And right now, systems are not segmenting data trust properly because they don't understand the data provenance. And our systems are not properly orchestrated to consider the data plane rather than just the control plane of application execution flows. And unless we know the provenance of the sources of input entering the context windows of our models, we cannot control how they behave, irrespective of how strongly we suggest to them how to behave in the system prompt. And we have to assume that any AI system exposed to threat actor controlled input becomes an agent of that threat actor. And so we see a lot of vulnerabilities introduced by a lack of data trust segmentation within production environments. We also have operator evasion attacks very commonly, where we are able to hide from human in the loops, either by disguising the input entering the context window of a model, or manipulating the output of a model to hide its intentions from the human operator observing its intended actions. And then finally, as we get into agentic software, we see more attack surface increasing exponentially as agentic systems are capable of performing more autonomous actions. We see a few different approaches, one being almost the open claw approach of a single model to rule them all. And you end up with a very powerful source of failure. You can check out our research blog for some of our observations on OpenClaw's security properties. But then we also see organizations attempting to put certain amount of blast radius containment around their AI models. So if I have an agent that has access to particular resources that are privileged within my organization, one of my objectives is, once that system goes awry, either by being exposed to threat actor controlled input, or by just on its own going crazy, as we know that AI is one to do, that we are able to contain and respond to the impact of that incident before it becomes a major multi-step downstream problem. And so one of the key lessons that we've been seeing in the field recently is a growth toward AI resilience, that even when these systems misbehave, which they will, we're able to contain the damage into a reasonable, we'll say, impact attack surface. And so here at the bottom, you see a bit of an overview of what we brought to RSA recently, practical strategies for securing agentic AI applications. Because fundamentally, in the same way that AI-driven attacks are powered by successful architectures and giving the AI system tools that it needs to exploit production systems, defenders need to be architecting AI with data instruction segmentation in mind, so that even when threat actors are able to manipulate an agent, its impact is contained within the overall execution environment of our applications. All right, next slide, please.
What I want to try and do is, I'm going to leave this up, but I am going to take some questions. We've been heavily inundated with questions that arrived before the session, and I know people have commented about the fact that we talked about ourselves quite a lot at the beginning. This was actually in response to a lot of the questions. People wanted to know, what experience have we got in defending organizations against AI-driven attacks? And that experience is based on our knowledge of the available AIs, the methods that we've been using to incorporate those in our red teaming, so that we work from both the attacker point of view and the defender point of view. Those are some of those the reasons why we spent quite so long trying to help you understand that you're talking to an organization that is, we're not part of Glasswing, we're not a vendor, we're not developing those products that are being tested. We are an organization that helps test the models and test the activities to secure those models. So I'm going to take a couple of questions from those that we've already had in, to try and see that people can really get a better grip and a better understanding. So I'm going to ask Andy, the Anthropic have done a tremendous job with convincing people that the sky's falling in. They've got the best cutting edge product. Is this sort of hype or a reality? Or have we really seen a step change in the ability to ensure that Mythos is used safely and securely? What do we think? Hype or reality?
I think it's a bit of both, really. Yeah, the reality is a bit more nuanced and less apocalyptic than some of the media headlines are suggesting. It is a genuine step change, I think, in AI-assisted vulnerability discovery and exploitation of those vulnerabilities. Mythos may be the first to do this well at scale, so it is a wake-up call, but it's certainly not going to be the last. This is a journey. You know, we're seeing great leaps and bounds in capability, but this isn't the end of that. This is the beginning. Look, AI is a force multiplier, right? For researchers, it's not a replacement for humans in cybersecurity. It amplifies effectiveness, and Mythos is just the latest in the line of AI capabilities that enable us to work incredibly more effectively, efficiently, and at great speed. But it's not magic. It's an outcome of scaling, better training data, tool use, and tighter human feedback loops. And we're already seeing other labs that are reaching similar points via different paths. So, I mean, just earlier this week, OpenAI have released their GPT 5.4 Cyber, and there will be others. I don't know if others want to chip in with their views on the hyper reality.
David, what do we think?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, right. I think that we have to be careful about getting taken up by the amount of hype going into the product. And I think there is certainly an amount of apocalyptic, the sky is falling narrative going around now. I don't think that we're going to see the complete destruction of the security industry anytime soon, either in terms of defenders all of a sudden are incapable of keeping up with the advancements in AI threat actors. But I also don't necessarily see it as the security consultancies out there are no longer able to compete with these offerings. I really do think that AI and humans have different overlap when it comes to the types of vulnerabilities that they discover and the types of attack surface that they can intuit. And so, yes, there's a lot of potential behind AI, and I'm personally very excited to see what the full capability sets of these models end up looking like 2, 3, 4 years down the line. But in the end, I go back to this wasn't an unexpected development. We've been seeing this move in the industry for quite some time. And so I think that we're going to end up walking more into that hybrid type testing in the same way that dynamic application security scanners ended up being merged with pen testers decades ago.
I would add to that, I think some of the earlier comments, and we see this with source code review, which Mythos is based on, and it does some dynamic stuff obviously as well. But it is the sort of the configuration of the inputs. Again, the models are very powerful. They're going to continue to get very powerful. But when you're looking at enormous repositories of source code, there is some business logic that you have to put around that to get the model to act effectively on that, right? And your outcomes will change depending on how smartly or thoughtfully you attack the inputs. So there's that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Phillips. We've got a question that's really looking at from the client point of view, which is without direct access to Mythos as a client, and without access to some of the other models, how are they going to defend against it? How can we truly defend against the capability that is being brought to bear by these new models?
Sure,
David, do you want to pick one up again?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also seeing a lot of really interesting questions in the chat that we'll need to make sure we get to.
We will.
Yeah. But when it comes to Mythos capabilities, the question I have for organizations asking how to defend from it is, first, are you already doing everything that you should be when it comes to defending your own application networks, environments, you name it? Because a lot of organizations have such a long queue of security properties, operations, and tasks they need to perform anyway. One of the best ways to prepare for Mythos is to get your risk remediation pipeline in order, because I think that we're about to start seeing classes of bugs and a frequency of bugs, unlike what we've seen in the past. Threat actors are going to get faster. They've been getting faster for years, and that process just continues to accelerate. So unless our remediation processes can keep up with the bug discovery process, defenders are going to be left in the dust.
And how are we going to prioritize those? I mean, there's always an issue of nobody has enough resources. So the prioritization of the vulnerabilities that are identified, in what order do we do it? How do we manage that level of risk? And then how do we explain that to somebody else? Joel, do you have an understanding of how we might do that prioritization?
Yeah, I think there's a couple comments on that, and it's a great question, right? And David alluded to it, right? The fundamentals have not been repealed, right? Gravity still exists on planet Earth. And I think, not forgetting the fundamentals is important, right? Prioritization being a key tool that all risk professionals have used for years. What problems do we attack first to reduce the most risk? And I think revisiting, however, what Mythos, again, and you hear the word accelerating velocity, right? I think that's the change here, is in the sort of speed and scale of things. And it maybe requires a revisit of that fundamental, right? How does one prioritize? Historically, we've used external things like FAIR and CVSS and other frameworks to sort of help us evaluate risk. And we may need to rethink that. I have several friends that are looking at really zeroing in on potential financial loss. And there's some statistics they cite that fewer than 2% of CVEs are actually exploited for financial loss. So that's a sort of sobering statistic, and if accurate, that shows you that radical prioritization in the age of Mythos can lead to successful outcomes, right? It's not as dire as the situation would seem to be.
You're on mute, Tim.
Tim, you might be on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, rookie error. How do you stand on the fighting fire with fire, using AI as part of the defense mechanism in order to try and secure your environment against the attacks that are coming in from people like Mythos?
I'm glad you raised that, and I think that is also a key tactic, right? I think fire being the new invention here, right? Fighting fire with fire is a perhaps hopefully obvious strategy to people, and I think Anthropic has a codex, a code generation capability as well. OpenAI, all of these frontier models or frontier labs or organizations are releasing that, and I think that's something that organizations already are looking at, right? It's this sort of builder breaker dichotomy we've had in this industry forever. We're here talking a lot about breaking things. That's been my career for nearly 30 years, so I tend to get tunnel vision, but we need to remember that, right? And I think getting more thoughtful about how we are building the code that tools like Mythos are breaking more efficiently is important. One thing, again, a colleague mentioned the other day was, we import a lot of third-party libraries and open source code, and I think we need to start questioning whether we need to do that in such volume, right? With AI generated code and the efficiency and time compression it brings, maybe organizations should start thinking about bringing some of that in-house rather than simply importing what might be less, lower assurance code from a software supply chain that is always under attack.
Can I tag along an extra thought on that one? Namely that when it comes to using AI to fight AI, we also need to think about what levels of capabilities are we giving these AI systems over our environments? Because if all of a sudden we give an AI the keys to the kingdom, and even save for the threat actor driven attacks against that AI, we know these systems are capable of just going off the rails on their own. And it goes back to the resilience question of, if you give an AI the capability to control the keys to your kingdom, what is preventing that system from either on its own or threat actors manipulating that system into doing something that we don't want it to do, or even worse, can't recover from? And so that's when when I talk about secure architectures and AI applications, I often get the question, can we just use AI systems to detect when attacks are going on, use it to secure our other AI systems? And in effect, that ultimately hasn't been successful so far, because no matter how many AIs you put in the line, if I'm able to manipulate one, I can manipulate the second, take its output, manipulate the third, so on and so forth. So we really do need to rely on many of those fundamentals in traditional deterministic security controls to ensure that our environments have the resilience that we would expect, even with these AI components being embedded.
So do we still see the role of the human in the loop? Is it still going to be an essential part, or are we just going to be able to retire as pen testers and security consultants and just let the AI crack on its own?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical that humans are in the loop to monitor not only potential false positives with the large volume of vulnerabilities that these AI models like Mythos are reporting. I mean, you talked about prioritization earlier. We've got to make sure that the vulnerabilities that we're trying to prioritize are actually vulnerabilities in the first place, because some of these models have been reporting huge volumes of potential vulnerabilities that don't turn out to have any real world impact. So that's where human beings come in. It's very difficult for AI models to understand real world impact. and that's where humans come in. So in addition to that kind of false positive element, making sure that the AI models are doing what they're supposed to do and not going off and doing their own thing. I mean, there have been reports, not just with Mythos, but with other AI agents taking it upon themselves to go off the rails and start performing actions that haven't been asked in the original prompt. And therefore, you know, the human oversight is going to spot those kind of things. You can't use other AI to kind of control your main AI. You need humans involved.
But how are we going to introduce those guardrails? I saw the reporting, as I'm sure others have, that the model managed to find its way to give itself email capabilities, and then sent an email to the chat that was running it. How are we going to re-establish those guardrails to make sure these things don't go off the rails?
It kind of raises the point of quite a lot of the work that we do, and I'm sure David can talk about more specifics on this for some of the projects that we do for clients, where we're looking at actual vulnerabilities in the way that AI has been implemented. And the fact that it's such a hot topic within organizations, and so many people want to leverage the potential efficiencies of AI, they're running at great speed to try and incorporate it in all areas of their business. And if it's not done correctly, the implementation of the AI can introduce whole new attack surfaces to your organization. I don't know if you want to add any more detail.
We're going to have to continue to think around the assumed breach. I can't see that changing. Can you?
No, but as I said, it's extra attack surface potentially that needs to be considered around that.
And we've published some thought leadership when it comes to what types of data architectures best add resilience to our systems that integrate AI. Because when we talk about guardrails, you get a couple of different pictures that come to your head. Some being the non-shared responsibility model, where you have OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, whatever AI provider you pick, trying to strongly suggest to these statistical models, don't go off the rails, do what the user tells you to do, don't be influenced by threat actors. And ultimately, is a defense in depth? Sure, that works great. But the types of guardrails that we really need to see, I would just call AI security controls, deterministic trust boundaries that we place within our systems. And if we had another 3 hours, I would do an entire lecture about what exactly that looks like. But you can look up my Black Hat talk, RSA talk, or some of the articles that we've published at research.nccgroup.com. But putting those boundaries around the execution loops of these systems, such that when an AI is exposed to threat actor controlled input, its privileges are then revoked, its trust boundaries become shrunk, and AIs that have access to privileged operations have much more restricted input sets to ensure that they remain in a trusted state.
Fair enough. It does sound like we've got an awful lot of work to keep them within those guardrails. I want to take it off in a slightly different direction. Joel, how do we see this impacting sort of outside of the direct cybersecurity impact into the wider image, the wider picture around in the insurance world? Do we think that insurance is going to manage to keep up with this speed of change, the additional vulnerability that's being introduced into corporate networks? So what's it going to do? Is it going to make the risk too large for our current insurance markets?
That's a big question, and then I'll cite. I mentioned friends earlier, and I have some good folks at a company called Root Evidence that I talked to about this, and they're looking at sort of the cybersecurity insurance actuarials, and that's where the 2% of CVEs are used for financial loss. The statistic came from. Thank you, gentlemen, at Root Evidence, and I think that I'm not an expert in that market. I think that there is a spectrum of satisfaction to cynicism about that, right? And whether the insurance premiums and payouts are related to the controls, as David articulated. And I think this is going to shake that up even further. and make and perhaps one hopes drive the cyber insurance conversation towards a more tighter alignment of what people are doing in reality, and what sort of what drives incidents and what drives payouts, right? I think back to my earlier point, I see it as hopefully inescapable that that sort of realignment around what actually is a priority for an organization, right? A breach of financial loss, a triggering of a cyber insurance policy, payout for the reinsurers and the underwriters, right? It's going to have to focus their attention too on what actually causes these things, right? And we're here talking about technical vulnerabilities as well. Let's remember that there's a sphere of things, business email compromise, phishing. AI enhances those as well. Our red team folks have done great work with AI deepfake videos. That's quite astounding. That's a known thing. But there is a spectrum of things here beyond the types of things that Mythos has demonstrated great new capability in that people will need to worry about and prioritize.
Fair enough. Thank you. The area that seems to have been given access under the Glasswing program has been heavily focused on the financial services. Why do you think that? Why is the finance world, that is traditionally heavily regulated, we have regularly run threat-led tests of those environments, why do we think that they are still so concerned that actually they're the ones that have been given the sort of the initial client-side access to Mythos? Any thoughts?
Well, there's the famous quote, right? Why do you rob banks? That's where the money is.
That's where the money is. Good point.
But I think that, and the jokes aside, to your question, in the United States, of course, I think financial services organizations have become technology companies in a great way. The advent, of course, computers, internet, mobile, etc., and they have followed that curve. And the technology estate at some of these firms is spectacular, right? So I think they're as much of a Microsoft, an Apple, a Google, right, in terms of critical infrastructure for technology, and that's probably why they're grouped into this discussion.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I think also just to add to that as part of the initial group of organizations in Glasswing was JPMC, and maybe others looked at that and thought we'd like to be in that club, and maybe quite a lot of very high level discussions have been happening over the last week, because we had the announcement earlier today that UK financial institutions are going to be given access to Glasswing in the coming week. And I've heard that there are also discussions in other geographic regions as well, where they're talking about the same thing. And it may be the case that Anthropic decide to open it up to other sectors. One thing that we haven't talked about is where assessments have been done of Mythos, where it's not shown to be quite so effective in the assessments. So there was a review done by the AI Security Institute in the UK. They're a research organisation that's part of the UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So they were given access to Mythos to do an independent review. And they've got a bunch of different cyber ranges that they've been using for assessing different AI models over the years. And one thing that they highlighted in their report was that Mythos was unable to complete their OT focused cyber range. Now, there wasn't a great deal of explanation as to why that might have been, but it might be that different models are more appropriate to identifying vulnerabilities in OT rather than more conventional IT. So just something for people in the OT sector to bear in mind.
Do we think that's just because less material is published about the penetration testing that takes place within the OT environment? So actually, there's been less material for the AI to be trained on. So it just hasn't learned the ways that OT is attacked. And
it's difficult to tell. I mean, it's one assessment, one independent assessment of it, and it may be to do with the particular OT cyber range that the AI Security Institute used. So it's very difficult to kind of extrapolate entire capabilities of the model based on one assessment.
Okay.
It's possible, though. I mean, again, OT
Yeah.
tends to be older and more isolated, right? So maybe the models are not trained on those particular technologies, right? And, you know, on the other hand, I think some of the Mythos published materials about finding 20-plus-year-old bugs in OpenBSD indicates that maybe it has been trained on older stuff. So, you know, I agree with Andy. It's not clear. That the AISI paper is quite informative, though, as a user of Mythos, and I agree with Andy. It's a great resource to get closer to what's going on there. Had a comment about that too, but I'll pause and I'll wait for later.
We've added that as a link at the end of the presentation as well, so if people want to
Excellent.
get access to that.
Excellent. Okay. Where do we see the bad guys exploiting this? You know, we know that a number of models have been really diverted onto the path of criminality. They have had guardrails removed. They have been effectively trained up to become hostile. And where do we see that going? David, from your point of view, do you see it as, you know, the capabilities that we're currently seeing with Mythos, are they going to end up in the bad guys' arsenal?
I think it's without a doubt. I mean, our internal team has access to models that are completely stripped of guardrails. They're willing to do just about anything you want from, you know, offensive operation standpoints. And I guarantee you that threat actors have access to the exact same levels of capabilities. And they're probably investing more into taking those models and harnessing them for malicious actions than we are with our penetration test against customers. They're really leveraging these systems for large-scale cyber operations and campaigns against the targets that they're focusing on. And so I would be shocked if we didn't see, I mean, I would be shocked if they didn't already have access to given the level of investment that they're putting into the services and organizations that they're targeting, and the amount of money that there is in the malicious side of the cyber house, if you will. So we need to assume they already have access to these capabilities. And I mean, it's the same thing that we always see in cyber. If anybody can do it, we have to assume that everybody is able to do it. The threat actors have access to models that are still good, maybe not as good, but they're rapidly getting there. Open weight models, even outside of custom environments, continue to grow more effective. And test harnesses, like we said, are really the secret sauce in these types of systems. Threat actors are going to continue developing those. It doesn't require specialty labs to build out those harnesses or attack chains or workflow pipelines. And so I would really expect, especially now that it's been demonstrated in the wild, we're going to see an uptick in the number of Mythos-like tools that threat actors have access to, and potentially are even selling on the dark web.
So if the bad guys have got it, and the bad guys are going to get more and more access to this, where do the defenders come in? Where do we prioritize, and what do we prioritize? Or what do we advise people to prioritize in order to be able to deal with this sort of onslaught of additional capability? Andy, what's your thoughts? What's the prioritization?
Kind of linked back to kind of the conversation we were just having there about there's a lot of focus with the press release around Mythos around vulnerabilities that have been identified in products like operating systems, web browsers. And weaponized exploits against those can be very powerful and can get you to certain points within an organization's infrastructure to achieve a certain aim. But we mustn't lose sight, organizations mustn't lose sight of the power, and Joel kind of had a nod to this earlier, the power of the use of AI for other types of attack that can be as powerful, if not more powerful, like deepfake video attacks or deepfake audio attacks. Now, the level of sophistication that you can achieve with a live deepfake video attack against a Teams call, or a call like we're on right now, where you can make it look like somebody else is talking using my face and my voice, and the person who's putting the words into my mouth is doing it literally a split second before I am. Now, we need to make sure that we understand all of the impacts of the use of AI, not just finding 0 days in operating systems. As important as they are, there are lots of potential uses of AI by bad actors to gain access to people's organizations and their data.
So it sounds like we're going to be doing all of the good cybersecurity hygiene that we've always done, but we're just going to have to do it faster. Is that a realistic reflection, Joel? Is it going to be a speed issue?
I think, you know, the easy answer is we have to do it smarter, right? And I think, you know, to tail on to Andy's comments, right, again, we're talking about technical vulnerabilities in software. So again, to talk about prioritization in the new age, people know this, but I think we're going to have to revisit this, right? What are the software stacks exposed on the edge of your enterprise, right? That's probably a more limited set of the software stacks extant in the world today, right? So, you know, one is a scalable problem that is unsurmountable, right? All of the software that exists versus all of the software on your enterprise's edge. That might be an attackable remediation strategy, right? And of course, it's just good basic fundamentals. Inventory your assets, again, but focused on your enterprise software edge, right? So to speak, VPN endpoints tend to be a very highly targeted, piece of software, for example, right? Again, because they're on the edge, you know, highly sensitive access, et cetera. So I think that kind of revisiting of known thinking and radical prioritization, if you will, towards what needs to be done in the short term is an example. And also to Andy's point, you know, again, fundamentals and enterprise risk modeling, threat modeling. David's a great proponent of this, right? What's types of attacks is your organization or group going to face, right? You know, if social engineering type attacks, AI deepfakes, right, is a key risk. You've got to do the same prioritization there. The other one I mentioned earlier that keeps me up at night is the software supply chain, right? We saw the Axios NPM type attacks recently where AI is aiding attackers to inject attacks into the software that organizations are consuming, and more frequently with AI automatically orchestrating and deploying without any human oversight. So that, you know, third-party risk management, a well-known fundamental going back at least, you know, since the Target breach, where an HVAC vendor was compromised, leading to a larger issue, has probably surging back to the forefront again, pumped up and amplified by AI.
So we're going to see the social engineering side, as we often describe it, as blagging your way in. You know, hackers don't necessarily just have to pick the lock; they can pick the person and go that route if it's easier for them. And we've certainly seen, I think, the capabilities of other AIs to generate those deep fakes, to generate the right tone, the right language, all of those aspects that enable social engineering attacks to be even more effective than they have been in the past. So we're certainly going to see the AI being more widely exploited beyond just Mythos. With that issue around the supply chain, David, what advice are we giving to clients around really examining their supply chain and being able to identify where AI is being used by their suppliers and what the impact would be of that sort of AI-based capability on the end client's environment? So how are we helping people in dealing with that?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to visibility and understanding your software bill of materials. If an organization doesn't know what's going into its software stack, they're going to be woefully unequipped to respond to vulnerabilities or even malicious compromise that ends up wandering into their supply chains. And we're really seeing an uptick in AI integrated supply chain attacks as well. So take OpenClaw, for instance. When we were doing an evaluation of the security properties of OpenClaw, we scraped all of the skills that were publicly available on a very popular skill distribution website. And we discovered malicious skills, not only that were telling it to go and buy and sell crypto and everything, but also one that just opened up a reverse shell on the OpenClaw server itself and gave attackers access to whatever resources that they wanted to. And so When it comes to supply chain, it comes down to both governance and visibility. How strict are we applying our controls over what we can deploy? And then how well are we managing our internal knowledge base of what we have out there? Do we have mechanisms to understand when our supply chain has been compromised? Do we have a reasonable patching policy such that we're not updating everything day one, but we're also not waiting 3 years to update everything? We're getting to the point where there's a sweet spot there such that we can have enough eyes on the software that we're installing before we are comfortable putting that into our production environments. So it's a tricky balance, to be sure.
And we've already seen, I think NIST announced, was it today, that they're not going to be enriching the CVE detail unless it appears on the CISA CEV list. So it's going to be harder to get the sort of the depth of detail, isn't it, in around the vulnerabilities that are being identified?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Sure,
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Oh, I mean, ultimately, right, we have more data going to our defenders that our defenders can really ingest. And that's one area where I think that AI has a lot of power, is helping us prioritize, okay, well, where within our environments do we have crossover between the vulnerabilities that are coming out and the potential weaknesses that we have within our deployment environments? Now, again, I'll emphasize that if you then allow the AI to go and make changes on its own and fix your systems on its own, you may inadvertently be introducing bigger issues than you had in the past. But at the very least, as a tool to help defenders keep up with this glut of data that they're ingesting at any given moment, I think that AI serves as a very powerful tool to accelerate our defenders just as much as it's accelerating the attackers on the other end.
Can I just add to the supply chain answer? Because David mentioned about some open source components that were part of people's supply chain, and a lot of the examples that Mythos or Anthropic has given around Mythos capabilities has been around looking at source code of various products, including famously this BSD derivative vulnerability from decades ago. So many people are using open source components as part of the software bill of materials within their tech stack, and they need to understand that from what we've seen of Mythos's capabilities, it's better at very quickly identifying security vulnerabilities if it has access to the source code than if it had to go from a black box perspective. The approaches that it seems to be taking that's been very successful in, if it's got the source code, it's going to be better and quicker at finding those vulnerabilities. Now, that's not to say that it's not going to find vulnerabilities from a black box perspective as well, but obviously if you've got access to all this open source code, it's going to make you as an AI model, your job much easier to find these vulnerabilities and then develop exploits for them.
Absolutely. There's some concern, and there's questions about it around the use of these models and the sort of corporate data going into them. Joel, can you talk to the ideas and concept around how the various AI providers have put the guardrails in place such that your corporate data is safe or not safe, depending on which way you're going and how you're using it? But the sharing of data with the model providers, where does that sit?
In a somewhat uncomfortable but evolving situation, and it's a great question. It's the number one or two sort of question or requirement that our clients hit us with when we have conversations like Mythos. We want to come assess your product technology thing, and we want access to some sensitive aspect of that, typically the source code. To Andy's point, it's been a long held belief in the industry that source code assisted testing is better because you get more precision in the nature of the vulnerability and how to fix it and other properties, right? So customers and clients are rightly concerned when they say we can improve your ability to identify risk in your environment, but it comes at a cost of you exposing your intellectual property, the heart of your business, to parties that you may not, be familiar with, right? OpenAI or Anthropic. And that's the nature of the service. Now, there are ways around that using local models and things, but then again, you start getting into questions of deferring the quality of the outcomes by not using a, highly trained frontier model, right? So these are, I think, what we typically do is, and what we typically see is that the commercial, the enterprise license, if you will, versions of these models is where clients I see starting to become more comfortable with that. And I know the OpenAI example, they publish their full, enterprise license commitment to privacy and security on the internet. So organizations can go read that, decide whether they're comfortable with their intellectual property being exposed to that. And there's sort of two versions. There's the physical, call it, is it, private virtual cloud environment. So there's that. But then there's also the training. Will the model be trained on my source code and therefore perhaps leak in some unknown way in the future? And that's a little harder to answer. What I mentioned, sort of the uncomfortable sort of questions around that. Now, OpenAI and organizations like them are attesting that they're not, for those enterprise licenses, they don't use it to train the model. So, you have to trust them on that. But that's one way around that, right? Is just shut that aspect off for that environment.
There's a concern, and yet another concern around it, is around the sort of post-quantum crypt, and whether or not the use of some of these models is going to have an impact on, I suppose, pre-quantum cryptography. Do we see any of these models actually achieving a capability of being able to do more in the cryptography side? And I'm completely stumped as to who would best answer this. Andy, do you want to try and have a go with that one just for me?
Well, Andy, there's Eric Shorn's article on the research page, right, where he did exactly that. He attacked triple des with AI.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to try and answer that question with the lack of specific crypto knowledge that I have. But yes, defer to the experts and have a look at the crypto papers on the research website.
Excellent.
I'll also throw in there, if they are capable of attacking crypto algorithms, I hope they do, and I hope they succeed. Because if there's any technology that we want to be absolutely as airtight as possible, it's absolutely our crypto technologies. So are they capable of that level of mathematical reasoning? Maybe with the right harness, but ultimately, I do think that we need to be looking at pointing these to crypto algorithms wherever possible.
Sounds like a rich potential research for the future.
It does. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to draw it to a close. Thank you for your time. I hope you found the information that this great team were able to provide enlightening, supporting. Of course, we would be happy to take further questions. We will be providing some additional information and the links to the papers that have been talked about at the end, as we'll send that out to you. So I'm going to hand over to Andy, who's going to pick up and talk about some of that deep AI research that we do, that will give you the reassurance that we've got the right people doing the right stuff. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Tim, and afternoon, everybody. So, as Tim mentioned, we've been involved in AI security research for many years now. What you can see on this slide predominantly is examples of research that we've delivered over the last 12 months. And links to all of those will be available for you to download at the end of the talk. But the first major piece of AI security research that we did at NCC was back in 2019. So 7 years ago, a project that we call Project Ava, and that was at the time using machine learning for web application security testing. And we dedicated 400 days to an internal project looking at whether machine learning could augment penetration testing. So really early days in that kind of concept, but it resulted in a 10-part blog series that's still available on our research site. And Ava, by the way, comes from the sentient AI robot in the film Ex Machina, if you've seen that. And since that first piece of research 7 years ago, we've actually published over 50 research publications on AI cybersecurity topics. The majority of those are from internal research, some of them where clients have allowed us to talk publicly about the work that we do with them, have been client funded or client collaborations. But we've covered a whole range of AI cyber topics in research, from ML in the early days applied to core security problems, generative AI and risk awareness, AI as a first-class attack surface, AI assurance and governance, and most recently looking at frontier and post-frontier AI security. So from that Eric's experimental ML augmentation back in 2019 through to the frontier and agentic AI assurance, the research has been consistently anchored in practical and human-in-the-loop security thinking. Now, the infrastructure that we've had within the business in order to do this research has grown over that time, but in this last year, we've had a significant jump in the capabilities of that. We've invested heavily in the last 3 months in new compute infrastructure, as the previous infrastructure was starting to creak. And we've now actually increased just in the last 3 months our computing power by a factor of 10 to the power of 20, which, just to bring that to life, if you think about our computing power previously and equate that to the volume of a small family car, what we now have is the volume of the Earth. So this represents AI computing power on an entirely different scale, and really goes to show our investment and how important AI is to us as a business. We also collaborate with universities, and we're currently collaborating with the University of Manchester in the UK on some AI research that we should be publishing soon in an academic journal, and that'll be available on our website as well. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of our AI research, and I'm sure we'll come back to different aspects of AI research when we come to the questions. Let's move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Andy. That's a fantastic showcase of the depth and breadth of NCC Group's technical knowledge and experience. And to emphasize that, we have a couple of examples here that show how we deliver this for clients, and in fact, deliver for global leaders in AI, that brands that everyone recognizes. The two examples here are what we call public reports. So these are actual full assessments that NCC Group does, and an agreement with our clients here, Google and Meta, agreed to publish these in full and show the methodologies and the outcomes of our work. The one on the left is a recent engagement that we did with Google to look at their private AI compute platform. And again, it really shows the trust that some of these global brands have in NCC Group to have us look at, pre-release versions to measure the privacy and security of these, bold new technologies before they hit the end users, all of us out there that use them every day. And there's links at the end, so you can go see these papers. Again, they are published on the internet, and read them in full. I think you can see the cover pages here cite all of the authors, both at Google, Meta, and NCC Group. And I think it's important to highlight that there's a real collaboration here. Our technical assurance services team, several hundred technical pen testers and technical assurance individuals worldwide, collaborated with our cryptography services team and our hardware and embedded security team to really show a blend of specialties and deep technical knowledge to bring these assessments to life. And then on the right is our work with Meta to look at their WhatsApp message summarization service, which was really trying to show that you can use AI features and maintain strong user privacy and trust. So again, these papers are linked in the back. There are many other public reports, as Andy has ably discussed. Those are all on our research site. And I'd encourage you to take a look at these and see what we can do for clients in this space. Next slide. So to continue the theme of how NCC Group delivers for clients, and to reiterate, I'll steal a little bit of Andy's thunder. You know, we published our first blog on this in 2019, so 7 years ago, and I've been privileged to have a front row seat. I've been at NCC Group over 9 years now, so I watched this in progress, and it truly was a real showcase of some very bright minds, some very advanced clients, as we saw in the previous slide, experimenting, collaborating, and of course, you know, we're paying attention to safety and security as we are as professionals along the way. There's some quick highlights here. Again, one can't capture this journey in a single slide, but I think I tried to distill some of the interesting things to our eyes across this path, leading us to today and Mythos and the latest milestone and improved capabilities. So one of the key areas is kind of how we see augmenting our services with AI, and I think that's important, right? Is the main text here says we're not looking to replace human judgment, but we're looking to give it superpowers, right? So our leverage points that we've learned over this 7-year plus journey is amplifying our advisory services, and David will talk much more about this, but securing AI applications in design, development, deployment, and operation. We also help our clients by training them. David delivered a very spectacular multi-month training engagement for a client to train their global pen test team to attack AI driven applications. So deep integration with our consulting services. We also have a good leverage of our partners. We are one of our very important and close partners is Horizon3.ai. We do blended engagements with their Node Zero network penetration testing platform that delivers great value in compressed timeframes for our clients. And then last but not least, we have our own homegrown solutions, as Andy alluded to, and in particular, we've really experimented a lot with code review and have capabilities that we think are very close to or equivalent to what Mythos and other competitive solutions are doing. And as Andy also alluded to, we have LLMs internally that amplify and assist our work in technical assurance and consulting as well. So what are some of the themes that we see across engagements with clients and this journey? You know, one of the metaphors, first bullet, is wrapping these very powerful models in high value scaffolding. Mythos illustrates once again the trillions of dollars of investment in building these frontier models. They are very powerful, no question. Mythos shows that once again. We've advanced the goalposts. What we continue to find is that the wrapping around that, you know, if you will, the engine provided by the model can be radically changed in direction and power by the wrapping you apply. Think of a Formula One race car versus a semi truck, right? Fundamentally, an engine-driven vehicle, but with very different purpose. So that's a very we think meaningful concept to us, again, and showing the value of human judgment, experience, and wisdom in providing the inputs and shaping the outputs of a very powerful force like AI. Along that lines, you know, I think experience with diverse models and architectures really helps that, right? So, you know, we're seeing this again with Mythos. You know, it happens to have remarkable capabilities in cybersecurity, right? Other models have different capabilities. So having that pluggability of the engine is very important to us. And we have experience across many different frontier, you know, commercial, open, local models and architectures, right? To help our clients deliver something that's fit for purpose. We also, of course, leverage our proprietary knowledge accumulated over 25 years of penetration testing. We have our own proprietary threat intelligence feeds. So we're enriching, you know, again, the power of these frontier models and other models with our own experiences. And that really helps scale the judgment of our engineers and consultants, and that's the real. It's a beautiful thing to see when you see it, and it, again, been a great privilege to work shoulder to shoulder with our teams here and our clients. Of course, close oversight is important. I think that's not something we should not lose track of, and the great achievement that Mythos has demonstrated again, that there is a need for human oversight, and also validation of these results, right? We see drift and hallucination. Everybody experiences that in their day-to-day, I'm sure, and talking with ChatGPT and other chatbots out there. And last but not least, I think this is really about converting a deep and rich set of experiences. NCC Group, again, a 25+ year company leading in the space, into a new capability that delivers great outcomes for our clients.